Good morning. Matthew chapter 5, beginning in verse 10 and 11 is where we're going to be this morning. And this is our last of the Beatitudes. So this will finalize our study on the Beatitudes. And we're talking about a very important one that ends here. It is, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And then we're going to group that next one right along with it. Blessed are those when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, verse 13. For your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. There's a lot we could say about this verse. There's a lot that we could dive into, a lot of different angles, but there's only going to be a couple of things that we can talk about this morning. When we go through the progression, and I've been talking about this progression down the line of the Beatitudes, you are supposed to be more mature as you get down the progression. You are poor in spirit. You realize that you're destitute of spirit, and that leads you to become a mourner. And you mourn because you know that salvation is only found with God. That makes you meek. And again, we talked about being meek as in a controlled power that we let God have over us. And then we looked at blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. This morning, this being meek leads us to a hunger that is unlike any other hunger and thirst that we've ever had. It's a hunger and thirst for righteousness. That leads us to be more merciful. And if we're merciful, then we're pure in heart. We give our entire hearts to God because we know if God has our hearts, He has it all. And then, blessed are the peacemakers, was what we talked about lastly. This leads us to the outward effect. If we believe all these things, if we are poor in spirit, we mourn, we're meek, we hunger and thirst for righteousness, we're merciful, and we're pure in heart, that leads us to becoming a peacemaker with other people, showing the peace of Christ to everyone. And then, finally, we get to verse 10 and verse 11. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Let's zero in on that word persecuted for just a second. Persecuted means the inevitable clash between two irreconcilable value systems. Now, let me say that again. Persecution is the clash, the inevitable clash, between two irreconcilable value systems. Now, what does that mean? It means that there is going to be enmity, there is going to be strife between us and the world. And notice what Christ here says. He doesn't say that it's going to be an if you are persecuted, it's going to be when. He says in verse 11, blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you. When? It's going to happen. It probably already has happened to you. Can you think of a time where you were taken to task? You were reviled. You were made fun of. You were laughed at. You were called ignorant. Think about those times. The world notices here. See, there's a progression here, and again, of if we do these things, if we are poor in spirit, we mourn, we are meek, we are hunger and thirst for righteousness, we're merciful, we're pure in heart, and we become peacemakers, the world is going to notice that, and they're not going to like it. Heaven is going to notice it. Hell is going to notice it. The world is going to notice it. And they're not going to like it. They're not going to like our attitude. They're not going to like the fact that we appear to be more high and mighty than them. They're not going to like the fact that we think we're better. They're not going to like a lot of things about it. And they're going to persecute us for it. Jesus here does not end necessarily on a bad note. What does he say? Blessed are those when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely, he says, on my account. And then he says in verse 12, he ends on a positive note here. It's almost like it needs a but right here. But, verse 12, rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great. Not good, great in heaven. For they so persecuted the prophets who were before you. All those who live a godly life in Jesus Christ will suffer persecution. That's what Paul said. In so many other instances in the Bible, we see the fact that there were people that endured persecution. And then Jesus says here, the prophets who were persecuted before you. You think about that great reward. You think about Jeremiah. You think about Daniel, Hosea, Habakkuk. You think about all those prophets who came before who were persecuted in God's name. But he says, you do this and you'll be blessed. You'll have a reward that is great in heaven. You'll have a great reward. And this is the toughest part, is to rejoice when we are suffering, rejoice when we are persecuted. He goes on to talk about you're the salt of the earth and you're the light of the world. If you do all of these things, he says, you're going to be the salt of the earth and you're going to be the light to the world. Let's think about that in depth this week. Let's think about making sure that we obey all of these things that Jesus says, that if we are going to be blessed, we are going to be happy, we're going to be spiritually prosperous if we do these things. We're going to be a mature Christian if we can obey all these Beatitudes. We're going to be persecuted for it, but our reward is far greater than we could ever imagine. We need to be the salt of the earth and the light to the world. Let's be that light this week.